12:01. We are going to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kim L. Hunt, and I'm the Vice President of Special Projects and Innovation in the Policy and Advocacy Department for AIDS Foundation Chicago. And I'm also very proud to serve as the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, which is a action-oriented convener and policy project of AFC. So as we approach the November 2024 elections, AFC is proud to present this webinar, Illinois Votes 2024, What's at Stake, a virtual fireside chat to discuss the latest voting information and what federal and state offices will appear on the ballots. Those of you may remember during lockdown, we had fireside chats with some frequency, and it's been a while. So thank you, Timothy, for bringing this back. I'm also proud to serve as today's moderator, where we will also discuss Project 2025 and its potential effects on people impacted by HIV and homelessness, as well as provide state and federal policy updates. But before we begin, I want to share a couple of housekeeping points. So during the program, everybody is going to be muted, but we're recording this session and we'll be sharing it out later. The chat and Q&A, it will be monitored so we can answer any questions that you have in real time. That is the hope. It's also worth noting that, and this is very important, AFC is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And in accordance with federal laws and regulations, we are not allowed to participate in partisan political activities or offer partisan endorsements in any election. So that is not why we're here. We're talking about issues and public policy. So now that I've done that, I'm pleased to introduce my colleagues and panelists for today's webinar. First, we have Timothy S. Jackson, who serves as AFC's Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy, where he is responsible for managing the staff that lead the organization's efforts on local, on housing, and also on state and federal policy issues in his role at AFC. Next we have Omar Martínez González, AFC Senior Manager of Policy and Advocacy. And in his role at AFC, Omar leads our efforts on the federal government level. So think of the Ryan White program, the HOPWA funding, which is housing related, and a push for a national PrEP program, which we will discuss a little later today. So welcome, Timothy and Omar. So Omar and Timothy are going to do the bulk of the conversation today, but I do want to throw in a couple of questions that we'll answer just to give a temperature check from our two panelists here. So first question for you is, we are a little more than a month away from Election Day, which is November 5th, for those of you who don't know. And honestly, Election Day is not the first day we start voting, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So given that, are there any policy issues that weigh heavily on your mind as we approach November 5th? Timothy, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you to everyone for hopping on and sharing space with us today. Immediately off the top of my head, the conversation around reproductive rights, bodily autonomy come to mind. Also understanding really kind of the fight in state legislatures around the country around LGBTQ rights and gender affirming care is important to me. Understanding also kind of the funding around housing instability and really kind of the push for affordable housing is something that is top of mind. And then kind of finally to kind of round it out is really kind of how do we meaningfully address the opioid epidemic, not just here in Illinois, but around the country, and pass meaningful reforms to address this issue. So those are obviously there are many more, but trying to be cognizant of time. Those are kind of the four at the top of my head. What about you, Omar?
Yeah, what comes to mind for you, Omar?
I mean, I absolutely want to echo the same issues that you've brought up, Tim. At the federal level, of course, right now we are still without a federal budget. The federal fiscal year 2024 ended at the end of September, and Congress yet again failed to pass appropriations bills to fund our federal government. Related to those issues that you just brought up, actually, there has been a concerted effort to insert harmful riders that are anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans, anti-reproductive care into these must-pass funding bills. And so that is of great concern to me.
Mm. All super, super important issues. So what are some things that you think that people should consider as they prepare to mark their ballots? And this time, Omar, why don't you go first, and then we'll go to Tim.
Thank you, Kim. So, of course, as I just mentioned, right now, Congress still hasn't passed appropriations bills. And I think it's important for constituents and individuals who are getting ready to vote to start thinking about how their members are voting, right? On the continuing resolution that I'll discuss later in my policy updates to keep our government funded until they're able to pass these final funding bills. We also want them to think about how their elected representatives are thinking about HIV and prioritizing the needs of people impacted by HIV, the LGBTQ plus community, and reproductive care, because if we leave out these individuals, people who are LGBTQ, if we mitigate or reduce access to reproductive care, we cannot end the HIV epidemic. And so those are vitally important issues that voters should be looking at how their members are voting.
Thank you. Tim, what about you?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is really trying to, I hope as people get ready to kind of make their decisions known at the ballot box, is understanding that the choices that we make in this election has lasting impact past a term. So if you're voting for president, that the impact that the president, whoever that will be, is not just for a term, but we're going to be looking at this for generations. And case in point, the next president is probably going to have at least one, maybe two Supreme Court vacancies. And we have literally seen over the past several years the impact of those vacancies and filling those vacancies. And so that would be kind of one thing that comes to mind. Another thing that comes to mind is something that is really, really important to me is understanding that down ticket races matter too. A lot of times we focus a lot on the presidential race, and by all means we should, but we should give just as much, attention to those down ballot races, because we understand that the government closest to the people impacts them more on a day-to-day basis. So think of your city council, think of your state house, state senate, your local school board. Case in point, if you live in the city of Chicago, on this ballot in November, you'll get to vote on the Chicago School Board for the first time ever. And so again, down ballot races matter as much as the top of the ticket. And so those are kind of two of the main kind of things that are top of mind for me.
Interesting that you should mention school boards. There's already a question about school boards. And for those of you who are old school Chicagoans, this has not been a thing for us. So this is going to be very interesting. So Tim, I'm going to keep you in the hot seat. So let's talk about the importance of making a voting plan, as well as sharing, you mentioned important dates to remember as we approach Election Day.
Give me just a second. I am going to share my screen. And I just want to go over some things on really kind of how we go about making a plan to vote. And really the first part is checking your registration and or registering to vote. Making sure if you think that you're registered to vote, you can always check that registration. And one of the key, a good rule of thumb is go straight to the source. So what does that mean? That means if you live in the city of Chicago, go directly to the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. If you live in suburban Cook County outside of the Chicago city limits, go to the Cook County Clerk's office. If you live in a county that's not Cook County, go to the Illinois State Board of Elections. And so that way you can check your registration and see, that's a great way to see if your voting precinct or polling location has changed. If you've always voted at the library, at the corner, that may have changed since the last time that you voted. And so make sure you check that information. If you want to register to vote and you have an Illinois license, driver's license, or state ID, you can register online. And so the period for that is to October the 20th by 11:59 p.m. And so we're going to share some hyperlinks later on in a follow-up email with all of this information I'm going over. And so making sure that you're checking your registration, see if you're registered to vote. Then you need to decide whether or not you want to vote early or on election day. We love some options, y'all. We love, love, love options. And the great thing of living here in Illinois is that you do have options on how you want to vote. You can vote by mail, which is what I do. And so my ballot automatically gets mailed to me. And I fill it out, I send it in. So easy. If you want to do that, you can apply, submit an application for a mail-in ballot. And that you go through that process and they will send you your ballot. Once it's received and completed, it just needs to be returned either through the United States mail or dropped at a secured drop box located at every early voting site. And so that is a great way. If you just kind of want to get it on out of the way, you want to be done with it, not have to deal with the stress of election day, that is a great option. Another option is early voting, where you go to a particular place. There is an early voting site that will open later this month on October 21st in all 50 wards of Chicago. And so you could vote there, but you can vote beginning today in the city of Chicago at the downtown Chicago voting super site located at 191 North Clark. And so you can go there and vote. You can register to vote there as well. And you can just get that done. Obviously, you can always vote on election day. That was something that my mother loved doing. She just loved the whole kind of process of it. Completely fine. If you are that way, that is completely fine. And you can always vote that way as well. I do want to mention that same day registration is available. So if you aren't sure, but you want to vote, and you can do all of that in one fell swoop. You will, if you're doing same day registration, you will need to have two forms of ID, one with your current address. So one of the things I would possibly tell you to do is just if you have your electric bill or you have natural gas or your internet bill, something with your name and your mailing, your address, take that along with your driver's license, passport, ID, and that should be good enough. One of the things that I always like to share as well is even though you do not, if you've already registered, you do not need to have a voter ID. However, I always err on the side of taking something with you just to be sure. I would rather have and not need than need and not have, especially if you're voting on day of. If you're voting on election day, make sure that you have that. Again, if they don't need it, it's great. But if they do need it, it would be awesome that you already have it and you're not having to get out of line or do anything else and you're still able to cast your ballot. Another thing that I would tell you to do is understanding that you need to review your sample ballot and research your candidates and your ballot initiatives. Understanding that this ballot, y'all, that we're going to be looking at for November is long. I was just looking at my sample ballot this morning. It is really, really long. Like 2 pages front and back. And so I want you all to understand that there's going to be a lot on it. Obviously, we understand the federal offices that will be on there for president and your congressperson. The United States House of Representatives will be on that ballot. You could potentially also have your state house. You will have your state house on there. You may also have a state senate race on your ballot. state Supreme Court will be on the ballot as well. And then we're going to be looking at a myriad of local, county, city races. So if, like, say, if you live in Cook County State's Attorney will be on this ballot. As I mentioned earlier, the Chicago School Board election will be on this ballot. You're going to be looking at a number of different judicial races. Judicial retention ballot will be on there. And then there are also 3 ballot initiatives on this ballot. And so one that will be around election worker interference, another for property tax relief, and then another one for assisted reproductive health. And so all of that will be on November's ballot. So again, when I say it's going to be long, prepare for that. And so what you need to do between here and the time that you want to submit your ballot, whether that is through early voting or on election day, is making sure that you do your due diligence, especially for those races that you may not be familiar with. And so reach out and make sure that you're doing all of that. Finally, I will just mention, what do you need to bring? I've already mentioned your ID. Just kind of have that, making sure that at least one of them is with your name and address on it. Another thing I would say, if you're doing election day, is make sure that you have comfortable shoes. Make sure you bring you some water or something, because lines could be potentially long when you're voting. And so just, again, making sure that you're ready. Another thing, I'm going to go through these really, really quickly, is understanding the important dates to remember. Early voting began in most parts of Illinois, not in the city of Chicago, September 26th, so last week. But early voting begins today at the Super Site downtown, 191 North Clark Street. Opened this morning, if I'm not mistaken, at 9 a.m. All City of Chicago early voting and registration sites open October 21st, which is a Monday. And that will be at least one in all 50 wards. And so you should be familiar with that. October 19th, and I don't know why I didn't do this in order, but anyway, all early voting locations in suburban Cook County will open. And so if you don't live in the city of Chicago, but live in suburban Cook County, all the early voting locations will open on October 19th. If you don't know where those are, please make sure you check the Cook County Clerk's office. October 20th is the deadline to register online to vote. Remember, if you're wanting to do that, register online to vote, you need to have an Illinois license, driver's license, or state issued ID. October 31st is the deadline to apply to vote by mail by 5 p.m. And then the granddaddy of them all, November 5th, is general election day, where you can register and vote on the same day, which is a boon for here in Illinois. And so those are all some important dates for you all to remember. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
And let's be clear, Tim, they don't have to remember, because we're going to send it to
Yes.
them
Yes.
right after
Yes.
this. That's a lot.
Yes. So let me stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Kim.
Yeah, I'll say that I'm a vote by mail girl because I like to be comfortable. I like to do my research. There are tons of voter guides out there. Y'all, I used to skip the judges because I'm like, I don't understand this at all. But I have found voter guides to be extremely helpful. And I look at more than one because there are biases that creep into these. So I encourage folks to Google Illinois voter guides, and all kinds of things will come up to help you for offices that you're not very familiar with. So thank you for that, Tim. Yeah, the judges guides, I want y'all to look at the chat. There's good advice popping up in there from the people. So in the lead up to this election, I'm sure especially folks on this call have heard about Project 2025. So next, I want to bring Omar into the space to discuss this document, this tome, what it is and its potential impacts on people who are living with and vulnerable to HIV, as well as people impacted by homelessness and housing instability and other issues.
Thank you so much, Kim. Tim, are we able to share the slide that awesome. Hello, everyone. Again, Omar Martínez González. Pleasure to be here. I do want to share some information about Project 2025, but before I do so, I want to reiterate that we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We are not endorsing any candidates, any political affiliations, etc. We are presenting, though, this important information about how this project, which is a conservative uh, framework, a conservative paper, and how it impacts our communities. And so that is the lens that we're approaching this from. So just to briefly give you some background information about Project 2025, in case you haven't heard about it, it is a multi-pillar plan that radically restructures the federal government and ensures that these changes are implemented on day one of a new conservative administration. So you've heard that this has been really dubbed the Trump Project 2025 plan, but really this is a project of the I'm blanking on the name. The Heritage Foundation, I'm so sorry. And so this is a project, again, that's been, kind of implemented in different iterations since the Reagan years. And so this is something that we can expect to continue to be an issue moving forward beyond this election. And so this is obviously an important issue for us to be aware of. It creates a roadmap to cutting or eliminating vital agencies and programs that maintain the health of all Americans, not just those impacted by HIV, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Medicaid program. It's a blatant attack on LGBTQ+ individuals, gender and racial diversity, reproductive care, and those impacted by HIV. It threatens the quality of life efforts that we've been kind of fighting for. As you recall, the National HIV/AIDS strategy, when it was recently updated, included quality of life measures for the first time. And so this would roll back improve nutrition and housing support services, which again would adversely impact our efforts to end the HIV epidemic in our lifetime. And it's also a document that's misguided, misinformed, dishonest, that is grounded in white nationalism, Christian patriarchal worldviews that misalign with the diversity of this nation and the values of AFC. And so now I want to share a little bit more insight into what this kind of project and program entails. And so, as I mentioned, Project 2025 is really a 4-pillar plan, right? The first pillar is the release of this manifesto that's been dubbed Project 2025. And I have parts of it here. It is a massive, over 900-page document that really sets the stage for how a conservative administration would dismantle and change the federal government to achieve these long-standing goals of this radical conservative movement. And so, again, that first pillar is publicly released. It's available online if you want to read through it. I've done the difficult work of reading through it on your behalf, and I'll be sharing again more insight into what this plan specifically entails. But the other pillars also include a quote-unquote clout list or a database of conservatives that have bought into this mandate, this manifesto, and are ready to implement it on day one of a conservative administration. And so this is a list that's managed by this foundation that has released this project. And it's really meant to provide personnel to be appointed to a federal administration were a conservative to take over the federal government, as well as to fill other positions of the federal government. It also includes a third pillar, which would include a training program that includes virtual and in-person components for individuals that are interested in taking part of this implementation of this plan to understand what they need to do on day one to be able to make it happen. And then finally, it includes a 180-day plan or blueprint for the transition team for the new president to basically implement this project in very strategic ways. The problem is that blueprint is not available to us. It's a secret document that obviously we have concerns about this public document that's been released. We can only imagine what this 180-day plan would include. And so beyond these specific pillars, I did mention earlier that this project, at least the manifesto that I'm describing, the 900-page policy plan includes a lot of misinformation and misrepresentation. And I want to give you a couple of examples because I think it's important as we discuss this to look at the lens through which this was developed, right? For a main example is when they discuss in the Health and Human Services section how the life expectancy of white individuals has dropped 7% since the end, quote unquote, the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. What they really do is try to tie it back to the racial equity and LGBTQ equity policies of the Biden administration, and basically are putting blame on those policies to bring up, to bridge the access gap for these already marginalized communities as a direct result for why life expectancy has dropped, when they're actually citing articles that are describing explicitly in those articles that the drop in life expectancy is actually tied directly to the decline or the refusal of white individuals to access the COVID-19 vaccine. And so, and another part of this project or this paper, they're describing how Health and Human Services has violated civil rights by forcing people to mask and mandated vaccines. But at the same time, they're using these same articles to push this narrative that is misleading to justify their worldview of how the government should function. And so inherently, this document cannot be trusted. There also is something that struck me. When I was doing a quick word search of this 900-page document, I looked for keywords around HIV, HOPWA, et cetera, other programs that relate to HIV services and people impacted by HIV. I only received 6 hits. Out of the entire document, there were only 6 times where these keywords were mentioned. And what that tells me is that this document was not developed with the inclusion of people living with and impacted by HIV. And so they're proposing massive changes to federal structures and programs that impact those vulnerable to HIV without the meaningful inclusion of people who are living with HIV. So that's just what we need to consider as we're kind of dissecting this. And we're already 2 minutes away from this time frame, or the end of this section. So I'm going to try to go quickly through some of the key items that I found that they impact directly people living with HIV. So for instance, this plan calls for the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to be dismantled and to actually be re-implemented as 2 agencies. One whose sole purpose is to collect data from states, and another agency whose sole purpose is to provide recommendations for policy change. Now, we all know that CDC, beyond just their work to collect data and also promote policy changes, they also do the important work of dispersing grants to organizations in the field who are doing the work of ending the HIV epidemic. And so by disrupting the CDC, the Center for Disease and Control and Prevention, we would be adversely impacting our ability to address the HIV epidemic locally here in Illinois. The plan also would direct the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to reverse the approval of abortion medications that recently they updated to make it easier for individuals to access things like mifepristone, as well as to be able to mail it via USPS. And so they would force the FDA to reverse those approvals that have been made in light of the reversal of Roe v. Wade, or the elimination of Roe v. Wade. Why does that matter? Because reproductive care goes hand in hand with our work to end the HIV epidemic. When we're attacking the ability of individuals to access reproductive care, particularly women and other individuals who can become pregnant, we're limiting their ability to access HIV treatment and prevention services as well, because sometimes that's the only time that they're able to access HIV prevention and care is through that entryway through reproductive care services. And so this paper also attacks the NIH for its gender-affirming care research, and it actually would weaponize the NIH to show how, quote-unquote, gender-affirming care is negative and harmful for our communities. It also attacks the NIH for promoting women in science. There's a policy within the NIH to ensure that conferences that they sponsor have a certain number of women in those panels. And so why is this problematic? When we think about the research that went into approving Descovy, which is one of the HIV prevention medications, women were left out of those studies. And so we cannot really use Descovy to help prevent HIV in women or people assigned female at birth. And so while that research was done by a private company, a private entity, it just shows the importance of having women in the room, especially as we're working to develop new therapeutics and new prevention methods for HIV. Moving on from NIH, this project defines Medicare and Medicaid as our national deficit problem. Now, the project calls for reforming Medicaid to allow for block grants and per capita caps. So the way that Medicare and Medicaid work currently is they are entitlement programs, and whatever the need is for people who are eligible for those services, the federal government basically pays for that care in conjunction with state funding. And so by implementing these limits to funding, it would adversely impact people living with HIV. Because when you look at the Medicaid program, about 40% of individuals living with HIV are using Medicaid as their source of medical care. And also, Medicaid accounted for 45% of all federal HIV spending in fiscal year 2022. So Medicaid is a tremendous service provider for people living with HIV. And if you limit funding to these programs, people living with HIV are going to be locked out of care, much needed care. There are other issues that are addressed in this project. I can't get into everything. We will be working with federal partners to kind of come up with a more detailed description of how HIV services are impacted by this plan. But briefly, I just want to talk about attacks to reproductive care, which include prohibiting Health and Human Services from providing abortion travel support. It also would eliminate the 2022 protections from clinicians in abortion ban states from performing emergency life-saving care to pregnant individuals under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, or EMTALA. There's just a lot of different issues that this project really harms our communities. And so, again, we'll be sharing more information, in particular how it impacts the LGBTQ+ community and those accessing reproductive care. And we hope that you will kind of stay engaged in that conversation. And I know I'm past time, so I'm so sorry, Kim.
Well, Omar, we gave you an impossible challenge to have such a limited amount of time to cover so much. It really is like a dystopian novel, reviewing that document and I thank you, Omar, for your work in actually reading that, because it's really depressing. And you mentioned the word entitlement. A lot of times that's a loaded word for a lot of people. And I just want to clarify that entitlement just means that you meet certain criteria. It's not the negative entitlement where you think you're supposed to have everything because you're supposed to have it. So I just want to be clear on that. So thank you again, Omar, for providing us with that context. So because much of the work surrounding Project 2025 will occur on the federal level, sorry, I can't talk. On the federal level, can you provide us with an update on important federal policy issues we're working on?
Absolutely. And so right now, one of the main issues that we're facing is funding, obviously. There are a lot of, or every year, Congress has to pass appropriations bills to keep our government functioning. And this goes towards funding that, funds programs that people living with and impacted by HIV rely on. I mentioned briefly earlier, CDC, all of those different prevention programs, et cetera. And so last week, Congress passed and President Biden signed a continuing resolution to keep the government operating until December 2024. So the fiscal year ended again at the end of September. And in the absence of federal funding bills, the government would have, quote unquote, shut down. I'm sure we've all heard that before. And so rather than passing these appropriations bills on time as is constitutionally mandated, Congress decided to punt the ball to the end of near the end of December, past the November election. And so federal funding is highly relevant, obviously, to the work that we're doing. It impacts people directly who are accessing HIV services. And so it's vitally important that communities, especially right now, as they're getting ready to go to the ballot box, also think about reaching out to their elected officials to talk about why HIV funding is so important to them, and how a lapse in funding would impact them. Another issue that's highly concerning regarding HIV funding is over the last 2 funding cycles, we've seen a concerted effort by extremist members of Congress, we won't mention parties, extremist members of Congress trying to cut funding for HIV services. HIV for a long time has enjoyed bipartisan support for a lot of programs like Ryan White, HOPWA, or Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. And the issue is that last funding cycle, fiscal year 2023, they proposed over $767 million in domestic cuts, actually zeroing out some of these programs like HOPWA. This time around, fiscal year 2024, they are proposing a less but still high number of around 500 million in domestic cuts, and are completely eliminating programs like the Ending the HIV Epidemic. They are slashing funding for the Minority AIDS Initiative. They're completely eliminating sections of the Ryan White program, funding for that program. And so this is kind of what we're contending with. And this isn't just a conservative issue. I mean, when you look at the Democratic side, for the last several years, the president has proposed flat funding for these programs. Given inflation, we know that even flat funding is a net cut in program services. And so there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of advocacy to be done for us to get funding levels to where we need them to be to actually meet the need of our communities. So this is a broad issue. It crosses party lines, and we just encourage all of you to really get involved and reach out to your electeds. If you need support, we're happy to make those connections for you to talk to them and tell them why HIV funding is so important. Another major hurdle is that on January 1st, 2025, we are going to experience an expiration of the debt ceiling. And this is different from federal funding and the government shutdown in the sense that if the debt ceiling expires, it prevents the federal government from being able to borrow funding to be able to pay its national debt. And a lot of that national debt also includes interest in debt that it has obtained from other countries. If we default on our national debt, that would adversely impact our entire economy and our entire structure. And so it is vitally important that we pass a debt ceiling increase. And unfortunately, this deadline was punted until January 1st, 2025. That is still before the new Congress takes over, after we know who wins the election. And so there is still a possibility that, extreme members of Congress could potentially hold this hostage and again would harm our economy and our institutions. And so finally, I want to bring attention to the fact that we're still working to promote and pass a national PrEP program. So we've been working since 2022 to get Congress to create a national PrEP program for people who are uninsured and underinsured to be able to access not only the medication, but also the medical visits and the labs at no cost to them, because we know that we have so much work to do to bring access to PrEP to communities that need it. And this would be one way to reduce that barrier. And so we've gotten verbal confirmation from some members of Congress who have been very engaged in HIV work here in Illinois that they support this national PrEP program. We're just doing the legwork to get more community input to inform this project, and we would love the support of our community to elevate the need for this program in Congress.
Thank you so much, Omar, for that federal update and your leadership in this area. And now we're going to shift to the state. So, Timothy, back to you. What's going on at the state level that we need to pay particular attention to for this upcoming veto session, which some people may not be aware that we have a veto session. So,
yeah, fall veto session. As its name implies, it's in the fall is for veto session. Generally, it is a time, usually 2 weeks, that the General Assembly carves out in the schedule, sometimes in October, sometimes in November. This year it'll be November 12th through the 14th and November 19th through the 21st. So it'll be post-election, where the purpose of a veto session is to go back and for them to override a governor's veto. Because we did not run into any governor vetoes this year during session, no major ones anyway. There have been talks that this fall veto session could potentially be canceled, because that's the initial purpose for hosting these days down in Springfield. If it's not, our plan is to continue our work on House Bill 5417, which is the HIV TLC Act, which is our main priority that we were able to get passed out of the House earlier this year in April, 106 to nothing. out of the House, but it kind of stalled in the Senate. And so over the summer into the early fall, we have been having conversations with members of the Illinois Senate to really kind of galvanize support to get this over the finish line, either through the fall veto session, those 2 weeks that I just mentioned, or the lame duck session, which is in early January, which has not been scheduled yet. Uh, and so that's the plan. If you're not familiar with what the HIV TLC Act is, essentially what it does, the three main components of it is: one, it mandates that state insurers and the Medicaid program must cover at-home HIV, STI, home testing kits without cost sharing. It would create 8 rapid start for HIV treatment pilot sites around the state. So right now, what we're looking at is for someone who is newly diagnosed, uh, getting into care is taking between about a month or so. We're trying to, these rapid start pilots would get them into care within 7 days. Also, the final part is ensuring that our county jails are providing HIV/AIDS education to those who are currently incarcerated, but as well as to visitors in accordance with the state's County Jail Act. And so that is a main priority that I, along with my colleague Aces Lira, our advocacy policy and advocacy manager, working with me down in Springfield on. In addition to our work around House Bill 2, which would create one pilot overdose prevention site on the west side of Chicago to address the opioid epidemic here in Illinois. And so that's the major part what we're working on for the fall veto session. We're also kind of keeping an eye on the 2025 spring session, which usually begins mid-January. And so the majority of our state policy priorities will be a continuation of our 2024 policy priorities. So if we're unable to get the HIV TLC Act passed either during veto session or through the lame duck session that I just mentioned, we would basically have to start the process all over again, which I really don't want to do. But that it will also include our work around overdose prevention site, which I just mentioned, our work to create a prescription drug affordability board, which we've been working on for a number of years, as well as legislation around HIV open access to medications. So basically taking away prior authorizations related to HIV medications and prevention. As usual, we will be advancing state legislation that increases HIV-related funding from the state. And we will also be pursuing legislation for additional money for housing specific to people living with HIV. And so all of those things are still kind of being worked out, but we should be releasing that policy priority list sometime in early February as custom. And as I've mentioned, again, if we're not able to get HIV TLC over the line, over the finish line, either during veto session or during lame duck, it will appear on our 2025 policy priorities list as well. And so that's really what we're working on. And so I'm going to toss it back to Kim to talk about ways that you all can get engaged with our work.
Thank you, Tim, for that. For telling us what's coming up if there is a fall veto session, but also for foreshadowing some of the things we'll maybe looking at for the spring. So now we're going to share some ways for you to get engaged. And again, don't worry about taking a bunch of notes or any of that. We're going to send this to you after the webinar. So we're always looking for community input, ways to mobilize our community and all of that. And so here's some things you can do to get involved. If you haven't done this before, we encourage you to type or text AFC to this number 40649. And what that does is it signs you up to receive mobile text alerts on how to get engaged in our work sort of in real time. Because throughout sessions and other times, we are sending out alerts to folks to connect with their legislators or other information. We also have 2 campaigns on our Mobile Action Center right now for you to engage with, and Tim mentioned both of these. One is to email state senators to ask for their support of HB 5417, the HIV TLC Act. Again, you don't have to remember that. It's all going to be right there for you. And then the second is to ask legislators to support HB 2, the overdose prevention site legislation. And there's one more thing that you can do. If for those who are not living with HIV, we encourage you to complete our survey, and you're going to get a link to that to gather community input about the National PrEP program. Again, we're giving you a lot of information. Don't worry if you didn't jot it down. If you're actually eating your lunch at lunchtime, that's fine. We got you. We're going to send this out to you later. All right. So we are already seeing some questions pop up, and I'm going to be honest, some of them we might have to answer in the email that comes out because we want to be thorough, but there are some questions that have been popping up, and we do have a few minutes to engage with those. So I don't know, Tim, Omar, if you see anything that you want to jump in, and I will share that Omar did put in the chat the link for the National PrEP program. There is, I'm scrolling through chat. But did you see something, Tim, that you?
Yeah, I just want to, there were a couple that were put in the Q&A that you answered, but I just wanted, I don't know if people saw them, so I do want to highlight those. Somebody mentioned, since the ballot is long, can I bring paper or anything in the voting booth with me to remember who I want to vote? Absolutely. You can bring in sample ballots, all those things, your voter guides into the voting booth with you so you don't have to remember, because I told you the ballot is long, y'all. So absolutely you can.
What you cannot do is tell other people how to vote.
Yes, yes, you cannot do that, but you can definitely bring those resources in with you so you don't have to remember, all those judges, all of the things that you need to vote for. Let's see. I see my good friend Jen Nagel Fisher is on. Thank you, Jen, for hopping on with us. Let's see. We're in the Metro East area and have been speaking with several of our local unhoused participants who are planning to vote in this election. They're voicing their concern about possible stigma, discrimination, or voter intimidation when they go to vote in person because they only have a state ID, which should be sufficient, and no secondary proof of residency, like utility bills. What are some ways they can prepare them and ensure that our friends without addresses don't receive pushback?
And
If
Tim, Jen did clarify that these are both folks who are already registered as well as people who need to register on site.
Yes. If they are already registered, they should not need any ID at all. If they need to register, they have a state ID. One of the things, because I don't know that right off the top of my head, we may have to look into that on how, because I want to provide accurate information. I don't want to give you something that's wrong. But this may be one of those type of questions that we need to do a little bit more research and get back to you on that one, Jen.
Yeah,
Anyone else
I
has that
agree,
question?
Tim.
Yeah,
I was going to ask our housing folks
yeah.
about that one, just to
But
be
that's a
clear.
great question.
Yeah. So we'll get that response out to folks.
Yep.
Scrolling back up here. Do any of the speakers have input regarding school board elections locally, concern regarding access for LGBTQ youth services, and also access to stories that represent them?
Yeah, I would just add, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I think a lot of the work around the school board elections have kind of gone under the radar.
Yes.
I don't know if many people even realize it's a thing, which is kind of disconcerting, but and it's only because, only from my understanding, if I'm remembering off the top of my head, that only 10 of these positions are up right now, and the rest are going to be appointed. And because you're doing this hybrid function of creating this. So one of the things I would tell you to do, Those voter guides are going to be great to try to find out, obviously who's elected, who the candidates are, reaching out to them via their social media, through if they have websites or whatnot, checking to see if there are any opportunities for public forums, where they're speaking about kind of what they believe and what they will bring to the school board. I think all of the issues that you mentioned about LGBTQ youth services, access to stories that represent them, are all critically important. And so I think that that's a great way to kind of get in contact with some of those candidates.
And I did a quick Google search. There are many guides out there for school board elections in Chicago. Were you going to say something, Omar?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in quickly, and I think Tim alluded to the importance of not only this election and downstate, um, candidates outside of the federal election, but also reiterating the importance of midterm elections in 2 years. I know that we're kind of heading into one election. Probably people are already exhausted about all of the ads that they've been seeing, but it's important to start thinking about your plan for the midterm election in 2 years. This Project 2025 initiative is really framed in terms of the federal government and what a conservative administration would do at the federal level. But we recently attended the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute leadership conference in Washington, D.C., and we heard from a variety of experts, and their warning to us and their messaging was really around how this project is already being implemented at the state level, right? And school boards were, of course, one of the main examples that were given. Individuals who support this project and believe these ideals are doing their best to integrate themselves into these school boards. And so that dictates obviously how schools, book bans, what education individuals receive, and the support that LGBTQ plus youth receive at those schools. And so it is absolutely vital that we are paying attention obviously to Project 2025, the federal elections, but also understand that it has a much more immediate impact locally through local elections.
And those battles are happening right here in Illinois. I want to be clear about that. So even though, we have some perceptions about, in reality, about all of the laws that are protecting various populations that are not protected in other states, those battles are happening here. We have partners in other parts of the state who are just going through it, from school boards on up. There was a question about leaving blanks on your ballot, and if that invalidates your ballot. It does not. But I do want to encourage folks, take your time, get your voter guides, and make a choice on everything. You're there, may as well do it. But I get it. 2 pages front and back, that's a long time. Also vote by mail, this is why I do it. So you can take your time. So there's lots of guides out there to help you so that you don't have to leave things blank, but I understand sometimes things are worded in ways where you just really don't know if you're voting for or against something sometimes. Do you see any more questions or comments that we need to, there was something about
Yeah, I see one.
judiciary.
Yeah, it says how much of the judiciary changes of the federal and Supreme Court appointments are outlined and already implemented from 2025. What can we do to push against this?
Well, we have to understand that right now we have a divided Congress. Right now, the House of Representatives is under Republican control, the Senate is under Democratic control, and we have a Democratic president. And so while there have been a lot of proposals in terms of legislation about that would potentially implement some of these Project 2025 initiatives, there's been a check and balance. And so none of that has moved forward as of yet. The threat exists, of course. Whatever makeup Congress has after the November election could really impact how much of these changes occur at the federal level. And so that's why, again, this election is important. That's, again, why it's important to understand what this project includes and how it impacts our communities. Because, again, beyond this election, this is a document that is living and it's being pushed to other administrations and potential candidates in the future. And so it's important to continue the fight to push against these harmful impacts.
And I just want to stress that Project 2025 is what's written down.
Mm,
We see these things have already played out at the state level all across the country. So we have to be mindful of that. And I share what Aisha is saying here, talking about the consolidated primary and an election next year. And there's so many elections. That is the joy and challenge of living in a democracy, y'all. And it's also means that we have to remember we the people.
yeah,
We the people have the power. But we also have to educate ourselves, unfortunately, because there are folks who are not rooting for the people who are on this call and who we serve on a day-to-day basis. You're welcome, Sheila. Thank you for saying that this was an informative panel. That was the goal. I don't see any more questions. Do either of you?
no, I don't see any more questions. I do want to just kind of put a couple of things before I know you need to do the
Mm-hmm.
closing. Is one, and I hate that I did not mention this. If you are voting in person on election day and you are in line when the polls close, stay in line. Do not leave. Also, if you get into where you're ready to vote and there are problems that you run into, unforeseen problems, do not leave there without filling out a provisional ballot because you can always fix it after election day to make sure that your vote is counted. And so those are some of the things that I want you all to remember
Mhm.
as we kind of get ready for all of these, um, these last few weeks of election 2024.
And there are election monitors
Yes,
present
yes,
as well, who you can talk to and lodge complaints with, and the election board where you can also um, note your observations.
yep.
So, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. I know there's a lot more we could talk about always. That's how the fireside chats went in the past as well.
Yeah.
But I love that we have such an engaged group of folks on. This has been an amazing conversation on Illinois Votes 2024, what's at stake. As I close, I want you all to know that we will be emailing information from today's presentation. We hope to get the recording to you when that email goes out, as well as a webinar survey. Also ask that you join me in thanking our panelists, Timothy S. Jackson and Omar Martínez González. On behalf of AIDS Foundation Chicago, I'm Kim L. Hunt. It's been an absolute pleasure to join you again for another fireside chat. Make sure that you make a plan to vote. We talked about it a lot. Make a plan to vote, to have your voice heard in Washington, D.C. and Springfield and Chicago and wherever you live. So thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day. And we have 1 minute to spare. Look at us. Thank y'all.